Queen Lyra stood on the balcony of her crystal palace and looked at the stars above her world. The stars had been her friends for 300 years, but now they brought fear instead of peace. Her empire was losing the war. The Krell were coming and nothing could stop them. The Krell were like giant insects with ships made of living flesh and teeth that could tear through metal. They had already destroyed 17 star systems and eaten billions of living beings. Lyra had tried everything to stop them, but her magic weapons were not enough. Her silver dragon, Emberwing, sat beside her throne and felt her worry through their mental bond. Dragons and their riders shared everything, including fear. Emberwing was massive with scales that shone like mirrors and wings that could block out the sun. He had been with Lyra since she was a child, and he would die protecting her. The War Council had gathered in the throne room earlier that day. Old generals and powerful wizards had argued for hours about what to do next. Finally, they had agreed on something that made Lyra feel sick inside. They wanted her to marry a human. Humans were new to the galaxy, having arrived only 200 years ago. They were strange creatures who lived short lives and had no magic at all. Their ships were ugly boxes covered in weapons, and their technology was primitive compared to what the Silverians had built over thousands of years. But humans had something special. They never gave up. No matter how many times they lost, they would come back stronger. The Council believed that an alliance with the humans might save the Empire. The marriage was necessary to seal the treaty between their peoples. Lyra had agreed because she had no choice. Her people were dying and she would do anything to save them. The human ship arrived 3 days later. It was small and gray with engines that made too much noise. Lyra watched it land in her courtyard and felt disappointed. This was the mighty human fleet everyone talked about. One small ship that looked like it might fall apart at any moment. The door opened and a man walked out. He was tall with brown hair and kind eyes. He wore simple clothes with no decoration or signs of rank. He carried no weapons and walked with an easy confidence that surprised her. This was Captain Ryan Blake, the man she would marry. Ryan bowed when he reached the throne. But it was a simple bow, without the elaborate movements her court required. He looked directly at her, which most visitors were afraid to do. Lyra was used to people being scared of her ancient power and dragon companion. But this human seemed completely unafraid. Ryan spoke in the common galactic language, but with a strange accent that made some words sound funny. He told her he was honored to help fight the Krell. He said he understood the marriage was necessary for the alliance. He promised to stand by her side no matter what happened. Lyra studied him with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. She could sense something strange about this human. There was power inside him, carefully hidden beneath a calm surface. It felt different from her magic, like comparing fire to ice. Both were powerful but completely unlike each other. She asked him if he understood what the marriage meant. It was not just a ceremony, but a magical bond that would tie their souls together. He would feel what she felt, and she would know his thoughts. There would be no secrets between them. Ryan said he understood and accepted it willingly. Lyra felt suspicious. Why would a human agree so easily to something so permanent? What was he hiding? The marriage ceremony happened that same night under 3 moons. The ritual was ancient and beautiful. Lyra and Ryan stood in a circle of light while priests sang in the old language. Emberwing watched from above with his great eyes reflecting the moonlight. When the final words were spoken, Lyra felt the bond snap into place. It was like a rope connecting her heart to Ryan. Through the bond, she could sense his emotions. He was calm and determined, but also sad about something. She tried to look deeper, but there were walls in his mind protecting secrets she could not see. Before she could ask him about it, alarms began screaming throughout the palace. The Krell had found them. Enemy ships were dropping out of dark space above the planet. Thousands of them filled the sky like a swarm of locusts. Their organic hulls glowed with sickly green light. The ships made horrible sounds that hurt to hear. Lyra ran to the command center with Ryan following close behind. Emberwing launched himself into the sky, ready to fight. The room was full of officers, shouting orders and watching screens. The Silverian fleet was already moving to intercept. Beautiful ships made of crystal and starlight moved in perfect formations. They fired beams of pure magic that burned through space. The Krell ships died by hundreds, but more kept coming. Always more. For every ship destroyed, 2 more appeared. Lyra had never seen so many enemy vessels in one place. This was not a raid or a battle. This was an invasion meant to destroy her world completely. She felt fear grip her heart. Her fleet was good, but not good enough for this. They would be overwhelmed in less than an hour. Her people would die. Her beautiful world would be consumed. Everything she had built over 3 centuries would end tonight. Ryan stood next to her, watching the screens calmly. He did not look afraid. He looked thoughtful, like he was solving a puzzle in his mind. Lyra wanted to scream at him. Did he not understand they were about to die? How could he be so calm when death was coming? Then 3 massive Krell dreadnoughts broke through the defensive line. They were heading straight for the palace. Each one was the size of a mountain, covered in weapons and armor. Emberwing flew to intercept, breathing cosmic fire that could melt steel. But even her magnificent dragon could not stop 3 dreadnoughts alone. The first ship fired, and a beam of energy struck Emberwing in the side. He roared in pain and fell toward the city below. Lyra screamed and felt his agony through their bond. She started running toward the balcony to jump after him. Ryan caught her arm and held her back. She tried to break free, but his grip was stronger than it should be. He told her to wait and trust him. Lyra wanted to hit him. Her dragon was dying, and this human wanted her to wait. But something in his voice made her stop. There was power in those words. Real power that made the air vibrate. Ryan walked to the window and placed his hand against the glass. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he smiled. The smile was not happy or cruel. It was the smile of someone about to do something they had been holding back for too long. Ryan opened his eyes, and they were glowing with blue light. Power exploded from his body in waves that shook the entire palace. The air around him crackled with energy that looked like lightning but felt like something else. Something that did not belong in this universe. Lyra stumbled backward in shock. What was this human? Through their bond, she felt his power, and it was vast beyond understanding. He had been hiding an ocean of strength inside what looked like an ordinary man. Ryan reached out with his mind and grabbed the 3 Krell dreadnoughts. They stopped in mid-space like invisible hands had caught them. The weapons charging on their hulls went silent. Their crews panicked as they realized they could no longer control their ships. Ryan made a fist, and the dreadnoughts crumpled. Metal screamed and organic flesh tore as the massive ships were crushed into tiny balls. In 3 seconds they went, from mountain-sized warships to spheres small enough to hold in one hand. Then Ryan turned his attention to the rest of the Krell fleet. Hundreds of ships found their weapons turning on each other. Navigation systems went crazy and made ships crash into their neighbors. Some vessels simply exploded from the inside as Ryan took control of their organic systems and made them self-destruct. The battle turned from a desperate defense into a massacre. In less than 5 minutes, the Krell fleet was destroyed or fleeing. When it was over, Ryan let his power fade. He stumbled, and Lyra caught him. She could feel his exhaustion through their bond. Using that much power had taken everything he had. The command center was completely silent. Every Silverian was staring at the human who had just done what entire fleets could not. Outside, Emberwing was climbing back into the sky. He was hurt but alive. Lyra felt tears on her face. Her dragon would survive. Her world was saved. But nothing would ever be the same. She looked at Ryan and asked him what he was. He met her eyes, and she saw pain there. Pain and guilt and the weight of terrible secrets. He told her he was a scion. A human with powers that came from the mind instead of magic. He said there were not many like him in the galaxy. He said he was sorry for hiding it, but he had to be sure. Sure of what Lyra demanded. Ryan said he had to be sure her people were worth saving. He had to know this alliance was real, and not just another civilization trying to use humans as weapons. He said he had seen it happen too many times before. Powerful empires who welcomed humans during war, and then pushed them away when peace came. He needed to know the Silverians were different. Lyra wanted to be angry. Her people had died while he held back his power. But through their bond, she felt his sincerity. He truly had been testing them, testing her, and apparently they had passed. She told him they needed to talk. There were things she needed to know about this power and about humans. Ryan agreed, and together they walked to her private chambers. Behind them, the command center erupted into chaos as officers tried to understand what they had just witnessed. The war had just changed in ways no one could predict, and Lyra had just learned that her new husband was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The next few days were strange for Queen Lyra. She spent her time learning about Ryan and his incredible powers. They sat together in her private library, while Emberwing recovered from his wounds in the healing chambers. Ryan explained that he was something called a scion. Psions were humans who had developed mental powers through evolution. They could move things with their minds and control energy and even affect the thoughts of others. But they were extremely rare. Only one human in 10 million was born with these abilities. The rest of humanity was completely normal with no special powers at all. Lyra found this fascinating. In her culture, everyone had at least some magic. Even the weakest Silverian child could light a candle with a thought. But humans had nothing until suddenly some of them developed these incredible psion abilities. Ryan told her that human scientists still did not fully understand why psions existed. Some believed it was natural evolution. Others thought it was the universe trying to give humanity a way to survive among more powerful alien races. Either way, psions were both feared and respected throughout human space. Many people saw them as weapons instead of people. Ryan had spent his whole life trying to prove he was more than just a tool for war. That was why he had hidden his powers when he first arrived. He needed to see what kind of person Lyra truly was. If she had treated him badly or shown cruelty to her people, he would have left. But she had been kind and brave, and willing to sacrifice for others. That was why he finally revealed his true nature. Lyra felt conflicted about this. Part of her was angry that he had tested her, but another part understood his caution. She had lived for 300 years, and had seen how people with power were often used and discarded. Through their marriage bond, she could feel his emotions. He was being completely honest with her. He truly cared about doing the right thing. 1 week after the first battle, another attack came. This time the Krell brought even more ships. They had learned from their defeat and changed their tactics. Instead of attacking in one massive wave, they split into smaller groups. Each group hit different parts of the planet at the same time. The Silverian fleet was stretched too thin trying to defend everything. Ryan wanted to help, but Lyra stopped him. She told him that he could not fight every battle alone. If he used his powers every time the Krell attacked, he would burn himself out. They needed a better solution. Ryan agreed and suggested they call for help from Earth. The human government had promised military support as part of the alliance. It was time to see if they would keep that promise. Lyra sent the message through the fastest communication channels. 3 days later, a reply came back. Admiral Kate Morrison would arrive within 2 weeks with a full expeditionary force. The message also mentioned something called Project Prometheus. Lyra asked Ryan what that meant, but his face went pale. He told her it was a weapon, a terrible weapon that humanity had built in desperation. He said it was powerful enough to end the war, but the cost might be too high. When Lyra pressed for details, Ryan refused to say more. He told her she would understand when the human fleet arrived. All he would say was that Project Prometheus represented everything humans could become when pushed to the edge. Both their greatest achievement and their deepest shame. This worried Lyra more than the Krell attacks. What kind of weapon could make a scion afraid? Ryan had crushed warships. With his mind like they were toys. What could possibly be more powerful than that? She tried to search for information through the galactic networks. Most files about Project Prometheus were classified. The few references she found were vague and contradictory. Some called it a miracle of science. Others called it an abomination that should never have been created. One report from a neutral observer described it as the most frightening thing they had ever witnessed. That report had been filed by a mechanist ambassador. Mechanists were living machines who did not feel emotions the way biological beings did. If something scared a mechanist, it must be truly terrible. While they waited for the human fleet, the attacks continued. The Krell seemed determined to destroy everything before reinforcements arrived. Lyra lost 3 colony worlds in 5 days. Millions of her people died screaming as the Krell consumed them. Emberwing fought in every battle. His wounds healed, but new ones appeared. Dragons were nearly immortal, but even they could be worn down. Lyra felt every injury through their bond. The pain was becoming constant. Ryan used his powers carefully. He would enter a battle and turn the tide just enough to let the Silverian fleet win. Then he would withdraw before exhausting himself completely. It was frustrating to hold back when he could end fights in seconds. But Lyra had been right. If he burned out now, they would have nothing left when the real crisis came. And everyone knew the real crisis was coming. The Krell were preparing something big. Intelligence reports showed massive fleets gathering at the edge of the system. They were waiting for something, building up forces for one final overwhelming attack. Lyra called her war council together. The old generals and wizards looked tired. Many had lost friends and family in the recent battles. They debated their options, but there were not many good choices. Some wanted to evacuate the planet and retreat to safer systems. Others wanted to make a desperate last stand. A few suggested surrendering and hoping the Krell would show mercy. Lyra knew surrender was not an option. The Krell did not negotiate, or take prisoners. They simply consumed everything in their path. Ryan sat quietly during most of the meeting. But finally he spoke up. He told the council that the human fleet would arrive in time. He promised that humanity would not abandon their new allies. One of the older generals asked what good human ships would do. The Silverians had magic and technology that was thousands of years old. Human vessels were primitive by comparison. What difference could a few hundred human ships make against the Krell hordes? Ryan smiled, but it was a sad smile. He said humans had learned long ago that they could not compete with older races in traditional ways, so they had found new ways to fight, ways that other species had never considered. The general pressed for details. Ryan simply said, they would see when Admiral Morrison arrived. After the council meeting ended, Lyra walked with Ryan through the palace gardens. The gardens were beautiful with plants from a dozen different worlds, crystal flowers that sang in the wind, trees with leaves that changed color based on emotions, fountains that flowed upward instead of down. It was a place of peace in a time of war. Lyra asked Ryan again about Project Prometheus. She told him she needed to know what was coming. They were married now, and bound together. There should be no secrets between them. Ryan stopped walking and looked at the sky. He was quiet for a long time. Finally he spoke. He told her that humans were terrified of being weak. For thousands of years they had been the only intelligent species on their world. They had fought among themselves and nearly destroyed their planet multiple times. When they finally reached the stars, they found a galaxy full of races that were stronger, faster, smarter, and more magical. Every human expedition met beings who could do things that seemed impossible. It was humbling and frightening. Humans realized they were at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. So they did what humans always did when facing impossible odds. They cheated. They looked for advantages that other races had never considered. They studied the fundamental forces of the universe and found ways to manipulate them. Project Prometheus was the result of that research. Ryan described it as a weapon that could rewrite the rules of reality in a limited area. It used pions linked together in ways that amplified their powers by factors of thousands. Working together, they could do things that should be impossible. Create matter from nothing, turn energy into solid objects, reverse time in small spaces, collapse dimensions. Lyra felt cold. That kind of power should not exist. No mortal beings should be able to affect reality itself. Ryan agreed completely. He said humans knew it was wrong, but they had built it anyway, because the alternative was extinction. Sometimes survival required becoming a monster. He told her about the 2 times Project Prometheus had been used. The first time they had accidentally erased a moon and everyone on it. Friendly forces and enemies alike simply ceased to exist. The second time they had created a crack in time that took months to repair. The peons operating the weapon had aged 40 years in 3 hours. Some had died from the strain. Others had lost their minds. Ryan said using Prometheus was like playing with forces meant only for gods. Every time they activated it, something went wrong. But they were going to use it again, because the Krell would not stop. And humanity had decided that any cost was acceptable if it meant survival. Lyra understood now why Ryan had been afraid. This was not just a weapon. It was a fundamental violation of how the universe was supposed to work. If something went wrong during the battle, it could destroy. Friend and foe together. They might save the planet or they might accidentally erase it from existence. Ryan took her hand and squeezed gently. Through their bond, she felt his determination mixed with fear. He told her there was still time to evacuate. She and her people could leave before the human fleet arrived. They could find safety somewhere else in the galaxy. Lyra pulled her hand away. She told him she would not abandon her world. If humans were willing to risk everything to save her people, then she would stand with them. Whatever happened, they would face it together. That was what the marriage bond meant. Ryan smiled, and this time it was genuine. He said he had chosen well when he agreed to this alliance. They stood together in the garden and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, the human fleet was coming. And with it came Project Prometheus, the weapon that might save them all, or destroy everything they were trying to protect. In 8 days they would know which the human fleet arrived exactly when Admiral Morrison said it would. Lyra stood in the command center watching the screens as ships emerged from jump space. 300 vessels appeared in perfect formation. Each one was different from Silverian ships. Where her people built elegant curves and artistic designs, humans built boxes covered in armor. The ships looked ugly and brutal, like they had been designed by someone who hated beauty and loved function, but Lyra could sense the power in them. These were warships built by a species that had learned war the hard way. Every surface bristled with weapons. Every angle was designed for combat efficiency. There was no wasted space, no decorative elements, just pure, deadly purpose. Ryan stood beside her and she felt his mixed emotions through their bond. Pride in his people's engineering, shame at what they had become, fear of what was coming. At the center of the fleet was something that made Lyra forget to breathe. It was a massive sphere covered in metal plates. Each plate was inscribed with symbols and equations that hurt to look at. Even from thousands of kilometers away, she could feel wrong energy radiating from it. This was Project Prometheus. Admiral Kate Morrison contacted them within minutes of arrival. Her image appeared on the main screen. She was an older woman with gray hair and hard eyes. Eyes that had seen too many battles and made too many difficult decisions. She saluted Ryan with genuine respect. Then she turned to Lyra and bowed. The Admiral told them the fleet was at their disposal. All 300 ships and all 47 peons aboard them. She also confirmed that Project Prometheus had been activated and was ready for deployment. Ryan asked if there was any way to avoid using it. Morrison shook her head. Intelligence showed the Krell were massing a fleet of 50,000 ships. No conventional force could defeat those numbers. Not even with all the peons working together. Prometheus was their only option. Lyra asked how it worked. Morrison explained that 12 of humanity's most powerful peons were inside the sphere. They were linked together through technology and mental bonds. Working as one, they could reach out and touch the fundamental code of reality. They could rewrite physics in a localized area, make impossible things happen. The Admiral said it was the most powerful weapon ever created by any known species. It was also the most dangerous. Every time they used it, something went wrong. People died. Sometimes the wrong people. Lyra wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell them to take their horrible weapon and leave. But she looked at the tactical displays. The Krell fleet was 3 days away. 50,000 ships full of creatures that wanted to eat every living thing on her world. She had no choice. She gave permission to deploy Prometheus. Over the next 2 days, Lyra met some of the human peons. They came to the palace in small groups. Lieutenant Maya Peterson could sense thoughts across entire star systems. Commander Lu Chen could manipulate gravity and make objects float or crush them with increased weight. Dr. Elizabeth Ward specialized in what she called probability engineering. She could make unlikely things become likely, make certain things become uncertain. Lyra asked how that was possible. Elizabeth explained that at the quantum level, reality was based on probability. Nothing was truly certain until it was observed. A skilled peon could nudge those probabilities in different directions, make a weapon malfunction at just the right moment, make a random meteor appear in the path of an enemy ship. It sounded like magic, but Elizabeth insisted it was science. Lyra was not sure there was a difference. The most impressive peon was Director Helen Wright. She was the one who would lead the team inside Prometheus. Helen was ancient by human standards, nearly 80 years old with white hair and eyes that glowed with barely contained power. When she entered a room, everyone felt it. The air became heavier, colors seemed brighter. Even Emberwing showed respect, and he rarely respected anyone except Lyra. Helen requested a private meeting with the Queen. They sat in Lyra's chambers with tea that neither of them drank. The old Sion looked at her with those glowing eyes and spoke bluntly. She said Lyra needed to understand what humans were about to do. The Krell saw war as survival. The Silverians saw war as a regrettable necessity. Humans saw war as a problem to be solved with maximum force. When humans fought, they did not fight to win territory or resources. They fought to make absolutely certain their enemies could never threaten them again. Lyra said that sounded like genocide. Helen did not deny it. She said humans had given the Krell every chance to negotiate. They had tried diplomacy and trade and cultural exchange. The Krell had responded by eating 17 billion sentient beings. So yes, humanity was going to make sure the Krell never did that again. If that meant genocide, then so be it. Lyra felt sick. She asked if all humans thought this way. Helen smiled sadly. She said no. Many humans hated what they were about to do, but they would do it anyway. Because the alternative was letting the Krell continue killing. Sometimes there were no good choices, only less bad ones. She told Lyra that using Prometheus would change everything. The galaxy would see what humans were capable of. Some would call them saviors. Others would call them monsters. Both would be right. Helen stood to leave. But before She left, she said one more thing. She told Lyra that Ryan had specifically requested this assignment. He had volunteered to come to the Silverian Empire, not because he wanted glory or power, but because he believed the Silverians were worth saving. He had studied their culture and history. He had seen that they valued life and beauty and knowledge. The galaxy needed more civilizations like that, and fewer like the Krell. That was why he had agreed to the marriage, why he had revealed his powers, why he was willing to use Prometheus despite the risks, because some things were worth becoming a monster to protect. After Helen left, Lyra sat alone for a long time. She thought about what it meant to be powerful. The Silverians had magic and long lives and beautiful ships, but they were losing the war. The humans had ugly ships and short lives and no magic, but they were winning. What did that say about the universe? What did it say about the nature of power itself? Maybe true power was not about what you were born with. Maybe it was about what you were willing to do, what you were willing to become. That night, the Krell fleet arrived early. 50,000 ships dropped out of dark space. At the edge of the system, they came in waves that blocked out the stars. The psychic screeching of millions of Krell warriors echoed across space. Even through the shields and walls of the palace, Lyra could hear it. The sound made her want to curl up and hide. The Silverian fleet moved to intercept. Beautiful crystal ships against organic horrors. Magic against evolution. Art against hunger. The first shots were fired, and the space between planets lit up with explosions. Lyra watched from the command center with Ryan beside her. He was calm, but she could feel his tension through their bond. The human fleet held position around Prometheus. They had not fired a single shot. The Admiral had ordered them to wait. Lyra asked why they were not helping. Ryan explained that Prometheus needed time to charge. The 12 peons inside were linking their minds together, building power that would be released all at once. If they were interrupted before the process was complete, it could kill them all. So the Silverian fleet fought alone. And they were dying. Ships exploded every few seconds. Brave crews who had trained for centuries reduced to atoms in an instant. Emberwing launched himself into battle. His cosmic fire consumed hundreds of Krell ships. But there were always more. Always more. Lyra felt every injury her dragon suffered. Claws that ripped through his scales. Acid that burned his wings. Teeth that tore at his flesh. He kept fighting because that was what dragons did. They protected their riders even if it killed them. The battle raged for 2 hours. 2 hours of death and fire and screaming. Half the Silverian fleet was destroyed. The survivors were running out of ammunition and energy. The Krell kept pushing forward. They were going to break through. They were going to reach the planet. Lyra prepared to evacuate the palace. She would not leave her world, but she could at least save the children and elderly. Then Ryan spoke. Just one word. Now. On the main screen, Admiral Morrison gave the order. Prometheus activated. The sphere opened like a flower blooming. Inside, Lyra could see the 12 peons. They floated in a circle connected by streams of energy. Their eyes glowed white. Their bodies were surrounded by power that made reality twist and bend. Helen Wright was at the center. Her voice echoed across all frequencies. Every ship in the system. I heard her. Every being, from the smallest insect to the mightiest dragon. She spoke in the common language but also directly into minds. What she said was simple. This is what happens when you threaten humanity and our allies. Stand down or be destroyed. The Krell responded by charging forward. 50,000 ships accelerating toward the planet, toward Prometheus, toward their doom. Helen and the other Peons reached out. They touched something fundamental. Something that existed beneath reality. The laws of physics became suggestions instead of rules. The Krell fleet stopped existing in 3 dimensions. Lyra watched in horror as 50,000 ships and all their crews found themselves spread across multiple realities at once. They could see themselves from impossible angles. Their organic ships tried to adapt but could not. You cannot evolve to survive having your existence stretched across 11 dimensions simultaneously. The Krell screamed. Not with voices, but with the psychic agony of 200 billion minds breaking. Then Helen collapsed it all back into normal space. But the Krell did not return the way they left. They came back wrong. Inside out. Fused together. Ships merged with other ships. Crews merged into screaming masses that were neither alive nor dead. The entire fleet. 50,000 warships. 200 billion Krell. Transformed into a single massive structure of twisted flesh and metal. It hung in space like a monument to the terrible things humans could do. Lyra could not speak. could not move, could not think. This was beyond war, beyond battle. This was cosmic horror made real. Beside her, Ryan was crying, silent tears running down his face. Through their bond, she felt his anguish. This was the power he had tried to hide, the capability that made humans feared across the galaxy. They were not just survivors. They were survivors who had weaponized their own desperation, who had learned to break the universe itself when pushed too far. And they had just proven it to everyone watching. The twisted mass of Krell ships and bodies hung in space for 3 hours before anyone moved. Every being in the system was frozen in shock. Even the Silverians, who had lived for centuries and seen countless battles, had never witnessed anything like this. Lyra finally found her voice. She ordered medical teams to help the wounded Silverian crews. She ordered engineers to begin repairs on damaged ships. She gave commands automatically while her mind tried to process what she had seen. Ryan stood beside her, silent and still. Through their bond, she felt his pain. Not physical pain, but something deeper. The pain of knowing what his people were capable of. The pain of being part of a species that could do this. Helen Wright's voice came over the communications again. This time, she was not speaking to the Krell. She was speaking to every civilization in the galaxy. The message was being broadcast on all frequencies, recorded and transmitted, through every relay station. By tomorrow, every sentient being in known space would hear it. Helen said that humanity had tried peace. They had tried diplomacy and negotiation and cultural exchange. The Krell had responded with genocide. So humanity had responded with Prometheus. She said the human government knew the locations of every Krell breeding world, every colony, every ship. If the Krell did not immediately cease all hostile actions, humanity would visit this fate upon every single one of their worlds. The choice was theirs, peace or extinction. 3 hours later, the Krell surrendered. Every hive queen in their empire sent messages of submission. They agreed to retreat to their home systems. They agreed to cease all expansion. They agreed to pay reparations to the families of those they had killed. The war was over. Humanity had won. But Lyra felt no joy. She walked through the palace halls, feeling numb. Servants congratulated her on the victory. Nobles thanked her for saving their world. But all she could think about was that twisted mass in space. All those beings who had died in agony. Yes, they were enemies. Yes, they would have killed her people without mercy. But did anyone deserve to die like that? To have their very existence torn apart and reassembled wrong? She found Ryan on the balcony where they had first stood together. Emberwing was there too. The dragon had returned from battle covered in wounds. Medical teams had treated him, but he would carry scars forever. Ryan was staring at the stars, not saying anything, just looking up. Lyra stood beside him, and they were quiet for a long time. Finally, Ryan spoke. He told her he understood if she wanted to end the marriage. What humans had done today would change how everyone saw them. The Silverians might not want to be associated with a species capable of such horror. Many civilizations would call for humanity to be quarantined, isolated from the rest of the galaxy, treated as too dangerous to interact with. Lyra considered this. Part of her did want to send the humans away, to pretend she had never seen what Prometheus could do, but another part remembered something Helen had said. Sometimes there were no good choices, only less bad ones. She told Ryan she would not end the marriage. Yes, what humanity did was terrible, but the Krell had eaten billions. They would have eaten billions more if not stopped. Sometimes stopping a monster required becoming a monster yourself. The question was, what you did afterward. Whether you stayed a monster or tried to become something better. Ryan looked at her with surprise and gratitude. He told her that was exactly what humanity struggled with. They had the power to conquer the galaxy. They could force every other species to submit through fear, but they did not want that. They wanted allies, friends, partners who could help them remember what they were fighting to protect. Lyra said that was why the Silverians would stay. To help humanity remember, to be a conscience when conscience was needed. Over the next few days, things slowly returned to normal. The twisted Krell structure was carefully dismantled. Human engineers worked with Silverian mages to separate the fused materials. It took a week, but eventually it was done. The remains were compressed and launched into a nearby star. No one wanted any trace of that horror to remain. Admiral Morrison began organizing the human fleet for departure. The war was over, so there was no reason to stay. But before she left, she met with Lyra one final time. The Admiral told her something surprising. Project Prometheus was being decommissioned. Earth Command had voted to dismantle it. What they did to the Krell had proven it was too dangerous to keep, too easy to misuse, too likely to cause disaster. Morrison said there had been accidents during the battle, minor ones that no one else noticed. For a few seconds, reality had started to unravel in ways that should not be possible. If Helen had held the effect for even 10 more seconds, the entire solar system might have collapsed. They had been that close to destroying everything. Lyra felt cold. They had almost died, all of them. Not from the Krell, but from the weapon meant to save them. The Admiral continued. She said Earth was also establishing new rules for Scion deployment. No more than 3 Pisions would be allowed to work together at once. Never again would they link 12 together. The risks were too great. Many peons had argued against these rules. They said humanity might need Prometheus again someday. But Earth Command had been firm. Some weapons were too terrible to keep, even if it meant being vulnerable. Morrison said this decision was partly because of the Silverians, because Lyra had shown humanity what it meant to fight with honor, to value life even in war. She said the alliance between their peoples was more valuable than any weapon. It gave humanity something worth protecting, something worth being better for. After the Admiral left, Lyra visited the Pions before they departed. Many of them were struggling with what they had done. Maya Peterson could still hear the screams of the dying Krell in her mind. Liu Chen had nightmares about the twisted bodies. Elizabeth Ward had stopped using her powers completely. She said she was afraid of what she might accidentally do. But Helen was the worst. The old Scion had aged 20 years in the 3 hours. Prometheus was active. Her hair was completely white now, her face deeply lined. Her eyes no longer glowed. She looked ancient and tired. Helen told Lyra she would never use her powers again. Leading the Prometheus team had shown her the true cost of such power. She said she felt the moment when reality started to break, felt the universe itself trying to tear apart under the strain. They had been seconds away from creating a black hole that would have consumed everything. The Krell, the Silverians, the humans, the entire solar system, gone. All because humanity thought it could play God. She said no species should have that much power. No matter how good their intentions, power that great always corrupted, always destroyed. Better to be weak and alive than powerful and damned. Lyra asked if Helen regretted saving them. The old woman shook her head. She said she regretted the method, not the goal. There had to be better ways. Ways that did not require breaking the universe. Ways that did not require becoming monsters. Humanity just had to find them. And maybe with Silverian help they could. When the human fleet finally departed, Lyra felt both relief and sadness. Relief that the terrible weapon was leaving her world. Sadness because many of the humans had become friends. Ryan stayed, of course. He was her husband now, bound by magic and marriage. But more than that, he was her partner. Someone who understood the weight of power and the cost of using it. They stood together watching the human ships jump away. Emberwing sat beside them. The dragon had been quiet since the battle. He had felt everything through his bond with Lyra, including her horror at what Prometheus had done. Finally he spoke. His voice was like thunder and wind. He said dragons had lived for thousands of years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched species evolve and go extinct. And they had learned one truth. Power without wisdom led to destruction. The Silverians had wisdom but lacked the power to survive. Humans had power but lacked the wisdom to use it properly. Together they might have both. Lyra realized Emberwing was right. The alliance was more than political convenience. It was necessary. Each species had what the other lacked. Each could teach the other. She turned to Ryan and told him they had work to do. The war might be over, but the real challenge was just beginning. They had to build something new. A partnership between species. A way to combine Silverian wisdom with human innovation. Magic with science. Restraint with determination. Ryan agreed. He said it would not be easy. Many humans were suspicious of magic. Many Silverians were afraid of human technology. There would be resistance and setbacks. But it was worth trying, because the alternative was remaining separate. And separate they were both vulnerable. Together they might actually change the galaxy. They walked back into the palace hand in hand. Emberwing followed behind them. In the sky above, the last of the human ships vanished into jump space. The stars shone bright and clear, peaceful for the first time in months. But Lyra knew this peace was fragile, built on fear of what humanity could do. Real lasting peace would require more. It would require understanding, trust, cooperation. It would require both species to become better than they were, and that was the true test. Not whether they could win a war, but whether they could win a peace, whether they could prove that different species could work together despite their differences, whether they could show the galaxy that unity was stronger than division. Time would tell if they succeeded, but at least they were going to try. And sometimes trying was enough. 6 months passed after the war ended. Lyra watched her world heal slowly. Cities were rebuilt. Families mourned their dead. Life continued as it always did. But nothing was truly the same. The Silverian people now knew what existed in the galaxy. Powers that could break reality itself. Species that would do anything to survive. The innocence of their long, peaceful centuries was gone forever. Ryan spent most of his time working with human and Silverian scientists. They were trying to understand how magic and psion abilities related to each other. Both manipulated energy in ways that seemed to break normal physics. But they did it differently. Magic drew power from an external source that Silverians called the flow. Psion abilities came from within using the power of the mind itself. Ryan believed that understanding both might lead to breakthroughs, new ways to defend against threats without weapons like Prometheus, ways that did not require tearing apart reality. The research was slow and frustrating. Silverian mages did not trust human methods. Human scientists were skeptical of what they called superstition, but gradually they began to find common ground. Small successes that proved cooperation was possible. One day, a young Silverian student discovered something remarkable. She found that human technology could measure and amplify magical energy, something that had never been possible before. This breakthrough opened new possibilities. Maybe magic could power human ships. Maybe psion abilities could be enhanced by Silverian crystals. Maybe, together, they could create something entirely new. Lyra encouraged this research. She believed it was the key to true alliance. Not just military cooperation but actual integration of their cultures. Ryan agreed. He spent hours teaching humans about Silverian history and culture, and teaching Silverians about human ingenuity and determination. Through their bond, Lyra felt his passion for this work. He truly believed in building bridges between species. But not everyone was happy about the changes. Some Silverians felt humanity was too dangerous to trust. They pointed to Prometheus as proof that humans should be kept at a distance. Some even called for ending the alliance, returning to isolation. Several noble houses began organizing political opposition. They gathered support among those who had lost family in the war, who blamed humanity for not acting sooner, for letting Silverians die before revealing their true power. Lyra had to address the council. She stood before hundreds of her people and spoke honestly. She told them yes, humanity was dangerous. Yes, they possessed terrible weapons. Yes, they had held back their power initially, but they had also saved the Silverian Empire when no one else could. They had risked their own people, used their most horrible weapon, and then immediately began working to make sure it was never used again. That showed character. That showed they were not monsters but people struggling with impossible choices, just like everyone else. She told them that fear was natural, but fear should not control them. They could choose to hide from humanity, or they could choose to help humanity become better. She knew which choice she was making. Many nobles were convinced, but not all. Some continued to argue for isolation. The debate continued for weeks. Meanwhile, on Earth, similar arguments were happening. Many humans feared what would happen if other species learned too much about psion abilities. What if enemies figured out how to block or copy those powers? What if sharing technology made humanity vulnerable? Admiral Morrison had become one of the strongest voices for continued alliance. She argued that isolation had never protected humanity. It was only by engaging with other species that they had survived. She pointed out that the Silverians had already proven valuable. Their magic had applications human science was only beginning to understand. Together they were stronger than apart. But others disagreed. They wanted humanity to remain independent, to rely only on themselves. The debate was fierce and divided Earth government almost in half. Lyra watched these developments with concern. If either side chose isolation, the alliance would collapse. Everything they had built would be lost. She decided to visit Earth. It would be the first time a Silverian queen had traveled to the human homeworld. Ryan accompanied her along with Emberwing. The dragon was nervous about visiting a planet with no magic, but he trusted Lyra and agreed to come. Earth was not what Lyra expected. She had imagined a world covered in ugly factories and military bases. Instead, she found beauty, forests and oceans, mountains and deserts, cities that blended nature and technology. Humans had nearly destroyed their world once, but they had learned from that mistake. They had rebuilt carefully, creating a balance between progress and preservation. The people welcomed her warmly. Millions lined the streets to see the alien queen and her dragon. They cheered and waved and showed genuine affection. Lyra realized these were not monsters. They were just people. Scared people trying to survive in a dangerous galaxy. People who had made terrible choices but were trying to do better. She spoke to the Earth government, told them what she had told her own council. That fear was natural but should not control them. That cooperation was stronger than isolation. That together humans and Silverians could become something greater than either alone. She also made a promise. She said the Silverians would help ensure humanity never needed weapons like Prometheus again. They would share their magic, their knowledge, their wisdom, accumulated over thousands of years. In return, humans would share their innovation, their determination, their ability to adapt and overcome. It would not be easy. There would be setbacks and disagreements, but it would be worth it. Her speech was broadcast across Earth. Within days, public opinion began to shift. People wanted to believe in the alliance. They wanted to believe cooperation was possible. The Earth government voted to continue and strengthen ties with the Silverian Empire. The alliance was secured. When Lyra returned home, she found her own people had reached similar conclusions. The nobles who had opposed the alliance had lost support. Most Silverians now saw the value in cooperation. They had seen Earth and its people. They had learned that humans were not mindless warmongers, but individuals trying to do their best. Over the next year, the real work began. Cultural exchange programs were established. Human students studied magic at Silverian academies. Silverian researchers worked in human laboratories. Trade agreements were negotiated. Joint military exercises were conducted. It was messy and complicated. Different languages, different customs, different ways of thinking about the universe. But slowly, steadily, they built something new. A true partnership between species. Ryan and Lyra became symbols of this cooperation. A human and a Silverian married and working together. Proof that differences could be overcome. They traveled constantly, visiting worlds, meeting people, solving problems. Through their bond, they had learned to work as one, anticipating each other's thoughts and actions, covering each other's weaknesses, amplifying each other's strengths. Emberwing became an ambassador in his own right. The dragon visited human military bases and civic centers. He let children ride on his back. He demonstrated the bond between dragon and rider. He showed humans that magic was real and wonderful. And he learned from humans too, their courage, their stubbornness, their refusal to accept defeat. One evening, Lyra and Ryan stood together on the same balcony where everything had begun. 2 years had passed since the war ended. 2 years of hard work and small victories. The stars above were peaceful. Trade ships moved between systems. No warships prowled looking for threats. The Krell had kept their word and remained in their home territory. Other species watched the human-Silverian alliance with interest. Some with hope that cooperation was possible. Others with fear that they were becoming too powerful. But no one could deny it was working. Ryan spoke quietly. He said he had been thinking about the architects, the ancient race that had seeded the galaxy with life. They had given every species gifts. Magic to some, technology to others, long life, great strength. But they had given humanity nothing. He wondered if that was intentional. If the architects had known, humanity would have to struggle. Would have. To develop everything on their own. Would have to learn to cooperate with others to survive. Maybe that was the gift. Not power or long life, but the necessity to work with others, the inability to succeed alone. Lyra considered this. She said maybe Ryan was right. Maybe humanity was meant to bring the galaxy together, to force cooperation through their very vulnerability. She told him that the Silverians had been isolationists for centuries, content with their magic and long lives. They had not needed anyone else. The Krell attack had changed that, had forced them to reach out, to find allies, to admit they were not sufficient alone. And humanity had been there, ready and willing despite the costs. She said that was what made this alliance special. It was not based on convenience or temporary mutual interest. It was based on genuine need and genuine respect. Both species bringing something valuable. Both species learning from each other. Emberwing stirred and added his thoughts. He said dragons had a saying, that strength alone is brittle, wisdom alone is passive. But strength and wisdom together are unbreakable. Humans had strength. Silverians had wisdom. Together they were becoming unbreakable. Ryan laughed. He said he hoped Emberwing was right, because the galaxy was watching, waiting to see if this alliance would last. If it succeeded, it might inspire others, might lead to more cooperation between species. If it failed, it would be seen as proof that different peoples could not work together. The pressure was immense, but they would not fail. Lyra took his hand. Through their bond, she felt his determination mixed with hope. She felt his love for her and her people, and she felt his fear that they might not be enough. She squeezed his hand and smiled. She told him they would be enough, not because they were perfect, but because they were trying, because they refused to give up, because they believed in something bigger than themselves. That was the real power, not breaking reality or living forever, but choosing to work together, despite all the reasons to stay apart. Ryan smiled back. He said that was very Silverian wisdom. Lyra said good. That meant he was learning. They stood together watching the stars. A human and a Silverian and a dragon. Symbols of an alliance that had changed the galaxy. The war had ended with fear and horror, but the peace was being built with hope and cooperation. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all. Not defeating an enemy, but becoming friends. Not imposing your will on others, but working together for something better. The galaxy would remember what humanity did with Prometheus, but Lyra hoped they would also remember what came after. How humans chose restraint over domination. How they chose partnership over conquest. How they proved that power was not about what you could destroy, but what you could build. Above them the stars shone bright, full of possibility, full of hope, full of a future they would create together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of cooperation at a time. The story of the human and the Silverian queen had begun with war, but it would continue with peace, and that was the best ending anyone could hope for.